the system. I will tell you that when the staff came to me and they thought this was going to be a great presentation to kick off Friday morning, I thought, wow, LAGERS state of the system. What can I tell the membership that they really want to hear? And what can I learn from those that have delivered state of the system reports before? Well, I've not seen a lot of pension state of the systems, but I have seen the president deliver a State of the Union address. And I thought, well, I'm not near as politically astute as the President of the United States, so that probably isn't real helpful. And I've had the privilege to sit through the governor's State of the State of address. But again, I'm not near as articulate probably as the governor, so I thought, what can I share with the LAGERS membership that would be informational, information that they could take with them and share with the employees back home? And I decided, rather than worrying about being somebody else, the president, the governor, I'm just going to be me. And being me means it's going to be to the point, and we're going to get on with it. So with that said, here we go. Okay. The LAGERS system is financially strong and a thought leader among public pension plans. That would be my one-sentence synopsis if I had to tell you that. I think this is exactly what our membership should be expecting of us. Financially strong, you want to make sure that we have the resources gathered to pay the benefits that have been promised. And that is exactly where we are in the system. Thought leader, well, you want to make sure that the system is in fact delivering the retirement security that you come to expect. We need to cover all the bases, if you will. Not only retirement, but disability, survivor's benefits. All those bases need to be covered and do it in the most efficient manner possible, which is part of our mission statement. And that's exactly what we're trying to deliver here, and I think we're doing a pretty fair job of it. The highest form of flattery is emulation or copying, and that's exactly what I see in the LAGERS office on a regular basis. Not that we're copying, but LAGERS is being copied here in the state of Missouri and across the nation. I can think in the last 6 months, I've had a couple calls from local pension plans in the state of Missouri, small plans that are trying to do things, and they said, boy, we need some help with our disability pensions. Can we get your section of the law and can we use it? Well, it's public law. Use it all you want, right? But they're copying what we're doing. I know on the investment side, and Brian can speak to this much more, but we had another plan, medium-sized plan, I'd even go as far as to say in the state of Missouri. And they called Brian and they said, hey, Brian, we really like the investment results you're getting and we'd like to somehow get closer to that. Can we copy your investment policy? So we gave him a copy of our public investment policy. Amazing how that works. If you can find something that's working for somebody else and use it, saves you a lot of time recreating the wheel, doesn't it? And even more than just statewide, I would say even nationally we're being emulated. I've had a lot of discussions, more so on the membership services side, but I know Bob, Jeff, and them have had calls, and people trying to emulate how we're using social media. They're just delving into that for the first time. We're probably 2 to 3 years into that. They're saying, we think that's effective, and I can tell you that some of the stuff that our membership services team is not just only to our membership, which is our priority, but I've seen it come full circle being tweeted across the nation within 24 hours, things that we put out. So it's quite humbling, and it's a real compliment that they're trying to emulate what we're doing. Now, with that said, I wouldn't go as far to say that we never copy somebody else ourselves, because, but we don't do it a whole lot. We're pretty much creative in our own world and all that, and but it is the highest form of flattery. I'm going to jump in on the financially strong piece here immediately and see what I can do. Financially strong. Here's a funding schedule is what they call it. If you'll kind of roll down to the bottom of that chart where you see the 2015 line. You see that the system is funded at about a 94.5% rate. You have to look at that at what it's been historically. You can see that it started in the last decade at 95, slipped up to 97. Let me help remind you, unless you've forgotten in the last 7 years, the Great Recession came along, took a bump in assets largely, and now we're back at that 94, 95 range. Very much a strong financial position. Now, this simply means that we have 94.5% of the assets to pay all benefits that have been promised to the membership. Not 100, 94.5. And you'll see, and further on in the discussion, that our goal is still definitely 100%. That's what our goal is, and that's what we're moving to. But clearly, we've moved up. That change is largely attributable to some very very solid returns that we've had over the last 5 years. If you look at the loggers' 5-year rate of return, I believe it's 12.2%. 12.2, very solid. Anytime that we can get returns above 7.25, which is our assumed investment return, is you're going to see this ratio increase. So that's a very good situation there. I do want to talk about another number that's buried within here, and that number is the 2011 line. The 2011 line, you see there that at one point we needed additional, and the way to look at this unfunded accrued liability, the magic term is, these are future contributions and/or investment returns above assumed that we need to meet the full obligation. At $892 million in 4 short years, that's went from $892 down to $351 million. Now, I want you to think about that. That's $541 million that have been made up in 4 years that will not have to be made up via contributions in the future. That is one perspective. That is a significant move. Now, if you were listening to yesterday's presentation talking about the big numbers, and he talked about millions, billions, and trillions. Think about $541 million, or more than $500 million have been made up in 4 years. So a very significant move there. As you look across the state of Missouri, you might say, well, how does the loggers rank relative to our peers? Well, in the state of Missouri right now, there's about 130 public pension plans. About 80 of those are defined benefit plans such as loggers. I would tell you that the 94.5% probably ranks us in the top 15% in the state of Missouri. It ranks us number 1 in the set of larger plans. If I do a subset and go to the larger plans, I won't name those other plans. I'll try to be kind, but we're number 1 there. Those larger plans are funded at a lower level than loggers. But there's some numbers inherent here that you need to be aware of. What about the national level? On the national level, where does 94.5% really put you? And again, I actually participate in an entity called the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, NASRA's the acronym. And there's 125 or so statewide plans that service employees throughout the whole state, not just a county, not just a city, but the whole state. So when you put all 50 states together and we report, about 125, so bear that in mind. Again, the 94.5% puts us in the top 15%, so a very, very strong position. But where loggers is unique to many of these other systems is that we continue to add new employers each and every day. Today, we have 675 employers. If you look in just this decade on this chart, and I went back and did a little homework just to try to give it some perspective. In the last 10 years, the system has added 151 new employers, 151. Because they come in with no assets, but giving their employees previous years of service, there is definitely a liability that's created each time that one of those employers join. The liability for those 151 employers, net liability today as it is somewhere around $45 million. So $45 million in liabilities have come to the table in the last 10 years that weren't even possible in 2006 because of new employers participating. So I suggest to you take 351, let's subtract 45 million. We're in the 305 range, right? That's kind of the number for the existing employers of that date, if you're tracking me there. Now let's go a step further in loggers. Each and every one of you as employers have the right to make adjustments in your benefits. We've seen quite a few of those over this decade, especially in the 2006, 7, 8 range. And then even recently, we're seeing quite a few. A number that was kind of staggering as I went through this. There has been 282 different benefit changes by employers and loggers in the last decade. 282. What you find, and I'm making a very generic statement here, but about 90% of those changes are benefit enhancements. They are increases. The flip side of that is about 10% of those are benefit reductions. Those benefit reductions are only prospective in nature. In the state of Missouri, you cannot impair benefits that have already been earned and accrued by the employees. but we do see some benefit adjustments downward. But that aside, my point to my 305 number that I just shared, there's additional liabilities being borne by governments by virtue of that action. And there's probably another 40 or 50 million, maybe 75, I didn't try to quantify that, of additional liabilities that have come on record during the last 10 years. If you take away that number, you can easily see where the system's liabilities have progressed down to about 250 million or so. So we're definitely making headway as it relates to those numbers. The next chart I'm going to share, and I say this affectionately, is called the short condition test. It's only a chart that the actuary could love, and we have actuaries in the room, so I'm trying to make them happy. This is the only place you see this chart used. You probably don't see it anywhere else, but it really drives home a point that I wanted to share. And that point is this. Look at the 3 columns there. One of those says active member contributions. That's the employees that have contributed. So all the way at the bottom of the page, you see about $134 million in employee contributions. The second column, retirements and beneficiaries. This is the money we need to set aside to assure that the existing retirees and beneficiaries can in fact be paid the benefits that have been promised to them. About $2.8 billion. And the last number 3, the almost $4 billion, is the employer share for covering the liabilities that they promised to their employees. Now move over to the right-hand side where it says portion of accrued liability covered. LAGERS has sufficient assets to cover 100% of the member contributions. They have sufficient assets to cover 100% of the retirees and beneficiaries. I'm going to pause there because if you go to many other defined benefit plans that are not in as good a financial shape as LAGERS, you would find they could not put a 100 in the second column. They're still trying to fund people already retired. That is not the case with LAGERS. We've already got the assets on hand and set aside to pay those future benefits. And in fact, you can see in the last column that in fact we're 90% funded for the current workforce. Think about that, the current workforce. So the current workforce includes employees that began to work last year, and for some of you maybe even that have been there for 35 years. So it would be our goal that by the time you retire that we have 100% of those monies set aside. But clearly, covering that last 10% margin, if you will, over some future time horizon, 10, 15, 20 years, doesn't seem like such a high mountain to climb. And you can see when I said we need to get from 90 to 100, well, just 2 years ago we were at 77, so we moved up 13% in that column alone. So I think it's very doable, very much within the scope of what we're trying to accomplish. Going to go a step farther here. This breaks you into a little detail of LAGERS. 675 employers. We're computing now somewhere in excess of 1,100 different contribution rates within the system. And those are sent out each year as part of your annual valuation to talk about the cost of the system. The emphasis that I would place on this chart, and you see the last, again, the bottom column is being emphasized. Of the 1,062 departments that have active employees, 738 of those are in fact going down. 80 are unchanged. If you put those 2 columns together, 77% of the contribution rates that will be applied in 2016, 3 out of 4 are unchanged or going down. The balance, about 25%, are increasing. An interesting connection with that 244 there. If you kind of slide up under increases and look at the previous years, you'll see again in 2009, 10, and 11, rates increased for almost everybody in the room. It was right after the Great Recession. There was quite a hit to our assets. And in fact, we were trying to make up for that. Rates did go up during that time. And there's some other events that happened. Many of you laid off employees, give special retirement provisions, people hit the exits, and you didn't replace them. And there was a real movement of trying to cover that cost for those employees that were retiring at that date and time. In many cases, your rates should have went up substantially at that time. However, the law under which we operate in LAGERS, and this is really from a budgetary standpoint, does not permit the contribution rate to increase more than 1% of payroll if there are no change in benefits. So somebody that was paying 8 went to 9, 9 went to 10 in the second year, and so on. When in reality, maybe the 8 should have went to 11 immediately in year 1, but the law does not permit that. Now, if you're the person in the room that does the budgeting for your subdivision, you say thank you, because I talked to somebody last night and they said, and I'm going to talk about the arch enemy, healthcare, they said their rate's going up 29% this year. Not 5, not 10, 29%. Well, you pretty much know where any excess funds are going to go. It is to that one line item, right? We have to address that. Luckily in loggers, it's more gradual in nature. But I make all that commentary to say this. Of the 244 departments that have increases in 2015, our actuary tells us that 135 of those are because we're still catching up to rates that should have been higher in 9, 10, 11. So that means only the balance of about 100 of those have been events of the last couple years that have actually driven those rates out. So I think that's important to understand a little history there. Rates have come up. We still have some work to do as a system. Rates as a whole are a little over 11% of payroll. If you would have went back to 2006, you would have saw they're a little over 10% of payroll for our employers. So in fact, we've got some work to do, still trying to work it back to where we were to begin the decade, but that is the challenges of this business. Going to go a step further in looking at the rates by department. Maybe this gets into the weeds a little far, and I apologize if it does. But again, some very interesting look here. If you look at the departments, 1,062 again, but now we've divided it, and I said there could be more than one rate for an employer. In our case, we actually divide the groups into 3, and there's very good reason that we do that. General, police, and fire have very different experience. We just see different pay raises. We see different longevity. Some stay for very long periods of time. Some don't. And so we have different assumptions applied to each of these groups, general, police, and fire. And then we went further and divided this into active groups. I will suggest to you that most employers that have groups of less than 10 people could not afford a defined benefit plan if not for loggers. It is only because of loggers that they can even participate in such a plan because of the administrative cost of doing this. But with that said, I want you to emphasize this. Our goal, your goal, is to make sure we have 100% of the assets in place to provide the benefits. You look at that number, 100 to 109%. You see 151, and if you move to the right and you add the 111 and the 186, what you see is that 42%, 2 out of 5 departments, are fully funded. The monies have been set aside. We can pay all benefits promised. Go to the next column, 75 to 99%. 114. 30% of the departments have assets that are in that range. Almost 100% funded. And the 2 columns on the left, 300, under 75% funded. But before you panic, I want you to think with me. If we've added 150 employers in the last 10 years, that's probably 200 different contribution rates. And those employers came in with no assets and gave employees past service, which is liabilities. Then, in fact, probably 200 of the 300 relate just to employers that have begun participation in the last 10 years. So most of this is because of those that are continuing to join the system. And that is where those numbers come from. The other thing that I would make, the other comment I make related to this is simply the volatility in contribution rates. For those that work in small departments, you would get more volatility in contribution rates. To my point, if 1 in 10 people leave this year, that's 10% of the workforce in your department. If 1 in 50 leave, that's 2%. Now it seems very simplistic. You still lost one employee in each of those departments, but it has more impact when you're in a small group. I want to talk about the system funding policy. This was adopted in late 2014. The system has a targeted funding policy of 100%. Leave no doubt. Loggers is not trying to collect more assets than we need. We are not trying to underfund it. You're not going to hear from loggers that, well, we're very comfortable. We're at 80%. What's that mean? We don't have 100%. That's where we need to be. I'm kind of sick and tired of hearing these other systems talk about how glad they are they're over 80%. It's better than 70, but it's not 100. That's where we need to be. Liabilities are being amortized over 15 to 30 years, depending on the circumstances, whether it's a new employer, whether it's a benefit adjustment, whether it's just the gains and losses from a current year. Obviously, as hard as we try to get our assumptions correct, there will be differences. Those differences are amortized over shorter periods of time, 15 years. And the last thing I want to talk about on this screen is the assets are smoothed over a 5-year period, and we use and Mr. Collette will talk about this much more in his presentation, but we use an assumed rate of return of 7.25%. That's what we need to accomplish over long periods of time. I want to stay focused on the decade we've just had. A lot of volatility in the investment markets. But 7.25. If you look at the last 10 years, Loggers has outperformed that number 6 times. We've underperformed it 4 times. Still well above. I told you the 5-year rate of return was 12.2. So very much above that. But still, there's something hidden in here, and that is simply this. Think about that 7.25. What's the volatility around that? So as I was thinking of that and looking at the Loggers numbers, I thought, I wonder how many times the rates of return come in pretty close to 7.25. For us that do not invest in the markets actively every day, you may have missed this in the last 10 years. The markets have been extremely choppy. Brian is the expert in this area, and he can talk to that. But if you were to take a plus or minus 3%, around 7.25. So if I ask you as a group, between 4.25 and 10.25, how many times did our annual rate of return hit that? That 6% range in the last 10 years. How many would you say? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Any guesses? Anybody awake? 4, 2, 0? Oh, wow, I think that came from the chief investment officer. I think there was one time that it actually came in. Now, so I want to make this point simply. Those that only have a defined contribution plan are watching this very closely. They're watching that market. Can I afford to retire or not? Is it going to be a negative number next year? Is it going to be a positive number? Is it going to be a low single digit? Is it a high double digit? They stay up nights worrying about this stuff. There are various surveys that are telling us that now. They're losing sleep because they're worried. 40% of the people are worried whether they can retire or not. And I'm here to deliver good news today because here's the deal. You don't have to stay up and worry about it. We've got a designated non-sleeper, and he's Loggers' chief investment officer. Mr. Collette's doing that for you. So he can stay up and worry about that at night. You can go to bed and rest. So that's the good news in this screen. Talking about being a thought leader. Loggers is number one, has a great, and I call it a plan document. It's the plan provisions under which we operate. I can never say enough for a gentleman by the name of Richard Roeder from Gabriel Roeder Smith. Mr. Roeder himself actually wrote our law in 1967. He actually looked at Michigan's law for local governments and copied what he called the best attributes of it and gave it to Missouri. And I think it served us very well. Probably the number one thing I point out here, and Mr. Ashcroft alluded to this yesterday, under Loggers, the employers make the required contributions. We have 675 employers. They're making the required contributions to keep this system sound. I heard a number just 2 weeks ago, and it kind of wears on me when I hear things that are not really positive. The comment was made, looking at those 130 plans across the country that are public pension plans, just like Loggers, they said, well, 75% of the plans are making 90% of the required contributions. Did you get that? 75% of the plans are making 90% of the required contributions. Well, let me say it in Loggers vernacular. 100% of the plans are making 100% of the required contribution. That's what keeps Loggers sound. Secondly, reasonable benefits. We all want to have super benefits, this person included. But those benefits have to be paid for. Loggers has reasonable benefits. The average benefit paid out to a retiree in Loggers is a little over $11,000, about $925 a month. That's a supplement to Social Security. That's where we are today. When I talk about reasonable benefits, we cannot be charged with having excessive benefits. I will talk about other plan provisions, and now so as not to offend any of the brethren from Missouri, I'm going to think about a plan in Texas that I'll leave unnamed. But I was at a conference and they said, well, we're having trouble funding our plan. And I said, why do you have trouble? And they said, well, our city won't give us the money. And they gave me a number. And for those that do the work around here, that number was somewhere in the 35-40% of payroll range to cover their retirement benefits. And I said, those are a little higher than what I experience in loggers. Can you tell me why? And this happened to be a public safety plan. And they said, well, we do have a pretty good provision for our employees. And I said, what's that provision? And they said, well, we've got what's called a 20 and out provision. I want you to think about the math with me. If I ask who wants a 20 and out, and I would see 100% of the hands go up, wouldn't I? I want that too. But let's think about the math behind that. I go to work at 21, at 41, I've got 20 years in. I can retire with full benefits. How many years is the system going to pay them full benefits? 40, 50. So you have to put enough money in 20 years to pay out 50 years. That's pretty tough math. That's why it's 40% of payroll or some number. Just the opposite of that, to try to give you again perspective, in Social Security, what do? You work from 20 to 65, 45 years, and they pay it for 15. So you can quickly see how those numbers change. Lastly, diversity of investments. Our Chief Investment Officer and the board do an excellent job of diversifying the investments, and they have stood the test of time. With a 5-year rate of return of 12.2, that includes everything that's happened the last 5 years. Been a good 5-year run, I have to add. 10-year number, and Brian will really get on this. I'm going to let him tell you how he accomplished these numbers. But 7.7% over 10 years, that includes the Great Recession. Go back 20 years, and you still have a return of 8.7%. That not only includes the Great Recession, but the tech bubble bust of 2001. So it has stood the test of time. It is that diversity of investments that have really been a tribute to seeing the system where it is today. But having a strong plan document inherited and given to you is one thing. I believe LAGERS staff and the board continue to pursue best practices and to make sure that we deliver the results for Missourians going forward. And one of those things we've talked about, and Mr. Wilson will talk about in his presentation, is simply pursuing legislation for the system to administer local government plans that put their new hires into LAGERS, and then we will actually administer those local plans if it is passed by the General Assembly, and it will permit those local entities to exit the pension administration business. I think that, again, is being a thought leader within the industry. Governance policy. I've been to many of your meetings, library meetings, board meetings, council meetings, whatever. I have to say this, LAGERS operates quite a bit different than many of your entities. The LAGERS board operates as a governance board, not a management board. For those that are in the management, maybe you understand that, and I know you would love for your boards to operate more in a governance model. The LAGERS board does not micromanage what happens every day. They describe via what I would call best business practices what they want to see the results to be. Given those best business practices, it is then up to the staff to deliver and meet according to the various policies that we have. You can see on this screen we have a number of policies, probably in the neighborhood of 15 or 20. A board operations policy simply says how many times do we have board meetings, who approves agendas. I don't set the agenda for the LAGERS board. The board sets their own agenda. How do you get items added to the agenda? Things of that nature. How do we elect a chairman, vice chairman of the board? All of that's included in our governance policies. We have a board policy development policy, as silly as that may seem. How do we revisit these policies to make sure they're accomplishing what we want? We actually have a governance committee led by Mr. Buck, our vice chairman. He makes sure that, in fact, we are revisiting these policies and they're accomplishing our goals, and if new policies are needed, they come under that. And lastly, this is one that you see very seldom. We actually stop once every 3 years and spend a quarter doing a survey of the board members and make sure via a board self-evaluation, are we getting the results that we want as a board? And if not, what do we need to change? And this deals with how board members correspond with each other, how they correspond with staff. Are they pleased with that? And if not, what do we need to change? So that's quite different than many of the boards that I see. Those are board policies. On the other side, there are some staff policies. Those staff policies deal with planning and budgeting. We actually have a business plan that we adopt in the first quarter of the year. From there, it's approved by the board, then we set a budget policy surrounding that. There is legislative policy on who will decide on whether we testify in the state capitol either for or against bills. Some, I and other staff have the ability to make those decisions. Other decisions rise to a level the board has to make those decisions. So there's policy set out there, so there's no doubt who's responsible for that decision. And last, management performance evaluations. Every staff person at Loggers receives an annual evaluation. It does affect any potential raises, and it gives us focus on how we can serve you, the member, better. That's always the goal. That comes from the top down all the way through the system. Lastly, there's other policies that I didn't put on there, things such as staff policy, travel policies, things like that apply uniformly across board and staff. You are served by a very focused and dedicated staff. I cannot say that enough. We put a lot of emphasis on professional certifications. May seem silly to you, but we want the very best in each area of where people represent you. One of the ways we believe we get that is through professional certifications. I'm going to throw out a bunch of acronyms real quick. I apologize if you've not heard of all these, but just to try to give you a perspective on the Loggers staff. We have 3 certified public accountants, CPAs. We have 3 certified government financial managers. That's an accounting, CGFM is what it's called. We have 2 certified employee benefit specialists. That covers the whole benefits arena, CEBS. We have 4 retirement plan associates. Those are kind of a subset that just specializes in retirement. Those are an RPA. We have 3 certified retirement counselors, those that help the individuals through the decisions of retirement. So very important there. We have 2 chartered financial analysts in the investment side, and we have 2 chartered alternative investment analysts. Over 1/2 of the 27 employees that work at Loggers have at least 1 certification. We put a great deal of emphasis on that. We believe that makes them better positioned to serve you each and every day. Meeting presenters. The staff, especially the management team, has requested many times to be meeting presenters throughout the state. There's actually a statewide conference called the Missouri Association of Public Employee Retirement Systems. They are basically, their purpose is to give education to board members of those 130 pension plans that I referred to. They have a meeting this summer. I happen to attend. I look on the agenda, and I find 4 Loggers staff people are speaking on that agenda in 2.5 days. That exceeded by 2 any other pension plan in the state of Missouri. So clearly, they're sharing their expertise. I know, again, Mr. Ashcroft alluded yesterday to the state of Illinois and some of the issues there. Mr. Wilson, Bob Wilson was at the state of Illinois has the same conference, and they had it about a month ago. 1,100 people. Bob was asked to speak at that conference. I know that Brian has spoke at many national conferences dealing with investments. So we're out there presenting, and people are emulating what we're doing. This last year, we've had numerous reviews. Just as many of you. We had our financial audit. I'm pleased to report we got that on Wednesday, and the auditor made no adjustments to the reports that were given by Melissa, our chief financial officer. There were no adjustments to the numbers she provided them. That's a big deal when you have that many different opportunities. $6 billion in assets, you can mess up a lot of places. She didn't, is what I'm telling you. We have another review going on. For those that deal in the financial arena in this room, I know there's just a handful of you, but this whole Governmental Accounting Standards Board, we're doing something called a SOC review. Now, I didn't say socks like you wear. I said SOC as in organizational controls. So we're looking at internal controls to comply with that. We've had a review of that this last year. The state auditor review, well, you heard enough about that yesterday. They visited us for 10 weeks and then took another 12 weeks to write a report that was 6 pages long and had 1 finding. So the last thing I want to talk about is a cost efficiency survey that we did. The sum of that is that Loggers provides about 10% more services than other systems our size, and we do it on $16 per head less for each and every member in the system. Now, you say $16 isn't a big deal. Well, maybe 16 isn't. But if you take 16 times 60,000, that's the number of Loggers members, we just saved you $1 million this year in delivering those benefits. So it does add up. The membership services team believes that face-to-face contacts are the most important. We had over 100 different meetings face-to-face this last year. We had over, I think, 18 pre-retirement seminars with over 900 in attendance. We have a number of meetings with employers directly. We had 21 different prospective employer meetings for those that were considering coming in. I just told you that we've had about 8 or 10 of those in the last 6 months that have actually come in. We've had webinars. We've had quite a number of those. I think I'm seeing 29 webinars with over almost 400 people in attendance those webinars. Those have become quite popular. People don't have to leave their desk to attend it. They can simply log in, follow the webinar, and get right back to work. Newsletters, we send newsletters to active members, to retirees, to deferred members, and our social media sites have continued to get a lot of play. I know the #1 group that's logging into Facebook is retirees. They want to keep up with their grandkids. I'm guilty, okay? It's an easy way to keep up with them, right? But social media is growing greatly. In our posts that we've had this year, 110,000 views. Not just, we put it out there, 110,000 views in the last 12 months on Facebook, Twitter. We have a Loggers blog. We also have a YouTube. All these are included on the website. If you're interested in seeing any of those, I would encourage you to log in there. System awards, these were kind of highlighted yesterday. I won't spend a lot of time on that. I will say on the first one, it was quite an honor to receive the Plan Sponsor of the Year award with over 3,000 public pension plans in America to be named the #1 because of returns and performance. It's a high achievement and I'm very proud. But most importantly, it says we're getting it right for you, the member. How about system challenges, though? I've given you 30 minutes of everything's glorious and all that. Well, there's always challenges, aren't there, with our jobs? Legislative issues continue. We have asked for the local plans bill, as we call it, where we could help with the administration of local plans to those that would place new hires into loggers. I've testified 10 to 12 times in the Capitol over the last 2 years for that. There have been 0 testimony in opposition to the bill, and yet we've not been able to get it across the finish line with the governor's signature. Continues to be a challenge. Maybe one of the more pressing things that we're seeing, and this really, I've worked for loggers 30 years. This is one of the more pressing issues in my 30 years. We have some employers that are getting close to financial distress, and what do you do with that financial distress? When they can no longer make those required contributions. Clearly, loggers thought about this, I think, in the very early days. And I say that because you can actually, in loggers, reduce benefits prospectively. So there is considerations there. And we've had a number of employers that have done that. I think in the last decade, there's been somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 employers that have had to reduce benefits because they could not afford the benefits they had given the current financial distress. They've made those adjustments, got their financial house in order, and in many cases, even went back and upgraded at a later date and time. But that financial distress is real, and this will come as no surprise to you. I see it most obviously in what is called our county hospitals. They are really struggling. This whole Medicaid reimbursement and all that's going on surrounding it is putting great pressure on the county hospitals right now. Lastly, opposition to defined benefit plans. There are many that just are opposed to the benefits that you and I have. Many of those come from just the private sector where they're given a 401k and it's fairly simplistic. If I can't have it, you shouldn't have it. I want you to have the same problems I've got to live with. And I suggest to you, we don't have a public pension crisis, we have a retirement crisis in this country. And until we address that in the bigger picture, this will continue to be a stress. One other opposition to defined benefit plans in Missouri, this is unique to us probably. There's an entity, and from those in the St. Louis region, you've heard this. It's called the Show Me Institute. It's funded by a multimillionaire. I know him personally. He is basically opposed to those unfunded liabilities that I showed you up there. And he thinks the best way to get rid of it is to just get rid of these defined benefit plans. That's the easy solution. And I'm here to tell you, when you can fund your belief to 5 to 10 million a year, you can buy some airtime. You can buy some print with that. And that is his goal. You should always look at why do people support something. Now, I said he was a multimillionaire. Would anybody want to guess how he made his millions? He sold mutual funds, would you believe? Well, if you're in a defined contribution plan buying mutual funds, I wonder if he might benefit from that at all. Okay, I won't go any further. I've identified some of the challenges. Your help is needed. We need you to advocate for secure pension benefits. That's what you've asked loggers to do. We ask you to advocate for that. Do not be shy about the benefits that you have earned. You have worked hard for those, and you are very much deserving of those. Make sure that people understand that you didn't just go work for 3 years and got a glorious benefit. You've put in 20, 30, 40 years to earn that benefit. You've given the best of your life to secure those benefits. In many cases, you have contributed for those benefits. Don't be shy about telling that. That story became very real to me when my wife, a teacher, retired at a young age, and somebody said to her in a public setting, well, I wish I could retire at 52. She said, well, if you'd paid 14% out of your salary, you're like I have the last 30 years, you could have retired at that age. So she wasn't shy about telling it, but don't be afraid to tell the story. I think the most important story that you need to tell is, in Lager's case, these are pre-funded benefits. When I retire, the money's already set aside. No future taxpayer is paying for my retirement. It's been paid while I worked. The bill is paid, and it's paid in its entirety. Other things? We need your help contacting legislators. I can walk the halls of the Capitol each and every day, and I'll do my very best to represent you, but you that vote for them, they listen louder. You may only feel like you're talking to the administrative assistant, to a chief of staff or whatever, but I can guarantee you every bill has a list of constituents that called, and your name goes on that list, either supporting it or not. And when that bill comes up in committee or comes up on the floor, they want to know what those in their district think about it. Please contact your legislators. And lastly, I say this. If you have suggested improvements for the Loggers Plan, let us know. You've seen us around as staff and board in blue shirts. I'm going to go as far as to do that dangerous thing that you should never do. My phone number, 573-632-6351. Call me if you want to know something. If you want something changed or want us to at least consider it, please speak to the board. Please speak to the staff. I want to close and say thank you for your service to Missouri citizens. It's because of your service that we're a better state. The Logger staff is inspired by your service, and we will definitely do all we can to make government better in the state of Missouri. And I close with this commitment to you to continue to get it right so that each person will have secure lifetime benefits in retirement. Thank you.